welcome on our post-budget interaction with the market experts and some of the best brains in the world. And today, on this particular session, talk to Manish. Uh, Manish Singh is the founder member of uh, Crossbridge Capital, and he carries a long experience of over 2 decades in managing money. And prior to Crossbridge, he has worked with Society General. And Manish also brings a experience in terms of managing global wealth. Welcome, Manish.
Thank you, Bharat.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Manish. Manish, nice to have you on the call. And thank you for coming and sparing time with our clients. Manish, I'm sure you've gone through the detail of the budget. Can you
Yeah.
just, tell me what's your initial reaction to this budget?
So I would say, but thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. What I would say that, I was quite enthused by, or I'm quite enthused by what I have seen in terms of infrastructure spending. That's something just stands out, in terms of capital expenditure, infrastructure spending, also keeping the deficit number higher. I strongly believe that, for a growing economy like India, and the template is very clear. If you look at what Korea has done in 70s and 80s and what Japan did before that, you have to make investments. Without investments, you just cannot drive productivity growth. I mean, obviously the government has to downsize. I go in for divestment, which we are doing slowly. I would have expected that that should gather pace, because the government has to really get out of doing business and let the private sector or the people who understand do more of that business, and government should be a facilitator. So I think on divestment front, more could have been done. Let's hope that more will be done through the year. But when I see the focus on infra spending, capital expenditure, and then really taking it away from like handouts or giving just people support and money, and this thing about you have to teach people how to fish, not to give them fish every day, right? So I think that focus is really very important. The second thing I would say, if you look at and sitting here in London and following the market, I can tell you the amount of focus that gets on India, and the amount of experienced investment professionals such as yourself, who are based in India, and there are other people who are returning from other places, the amount of that activity that goes on, the fruit of a lot of this thing will be felt down the line. Because when you have experienced investment professionals, long career, who have got the best expertise working at global banks, spending more time in India, doing more things in India, that's exactly when you change the culture. You change the corporate culture, the responsibility. You also help the promoters who so far, in double quotes, have misused many of the privilege that they had, and make them think that that's not the way to really make money. You will get paid even more if you grow the pie. So I see a lot of things coming together, but at least government has to very important role. So when I see that they are doing 100 billion of spending, at least from what I see from the numbers this year, that tax collection looks very good, and that should probably come above expectation. And still, while India is coming out of this COVID thing that the world had, the hand-holding and the support from government spending, which makes private sector feel that there's something that they can rely on, is very vital. And all that came through. Of course, you can be critical of any budget because you will not get everything. People will want, oh, there was nothing about tax cuts, and you can ask for everything. Even if the finance minister gave everyone a unicorn, people will still be unhappy about the color of the unicorn. So I think that there will always be things that you're unhappy about. But if you look at larger picture, I think it's a very good budget, and it is in line with what has been done so far. But I would really like to see more divestment. I strongly believe that productivity growth cannot happen if government runs vast chunks of economy. That should not happen. It should go down to not just experienced people, but also where you really monitor and make corrections when needed, independent directors and everything. And I think that needs to be done. That's the only thing which is lacking. But that's again a long story, 5 year. It might take even more than that to achieve that. But let's hope we have more divestment, more capital coming in, and that gets plowed back into economy. I hope that
So
answers your question, Bharat.
yeah, Manish. So broadly, to look at, as you rightly mentioned, right, $100 billion is what they're talking about capex, and I think, do you believe that this is broadly an investment-led budget rather than focusing on the consumption story? Because there was hardly
Yeah,
anything in terms of increasing the pie in the hands of a middle class
true.
or a lower middle class, or even though the election is just around the corner, there was no
Mm.
freebies. So is
True,
that,
true.
you believe that this is more a growth oriented investment led budget broadly?
Hmm. Yeah. So what I would say then, if I'm looking at a growth story and as an investor, I quite like what I see. I quite like that the focus of government is not on just gimmicks. It's not about just 2 elections or 3 elections. And when we take that grown-up approach to building economy, to growing, we also shift the political debate. You make the opposition come and play at a level where it is good for the country. It's not just about, you have seen what the cheap populism has done. I grew up in Jamshedpur, and I know that how Bihar, and that time it was Bihar, now of course it's Jharkhand, the whole populism that came with reservation, how destructive it was to people of that state, to the economy, despite having some of the best brains in that state, rich in natural resources. We just couldn't deliver it because ultimately, no matter how clever you are, no matter what enterprising stuff, you have to work according to the rules and rails of the economy. And I think so what I really like about what I have seen, that there is a sense of more grown up thing which is going on, and that comes from political stability. You don't have a party or a prime minister who thinks that, oh, they might be out of office in 2 years' time, so they should do any gimmicks to stay there. I mean, that's just the wrong kind of policy making. I think across the political spectrum, there has to be an agreement. There are certain things that we have to do, no matter who stays in power, because that is good for the country, good for the people. And I think with political stability, those debates are happening, where even the opposition will reluctantly be dragged into a development debate, not in a gimmicky thing. So I could see a lot of, as I said, I think I would like to see more divestment, much faster divestment, because there is no reason for government to run some of these businesses when it could be run much better in a much more responsible way. And that would really boom the growth and productivity. You need productivity growth. Without productivity growth, you just cannot have people getting prosperous. You cannot spend on education. You cannot spend on healthcare. You cannot spend, and these have multiple returns. Like multiplier effect is huge if you have a healthy population which is educated. I mean, if you have an educated population, and there's no place to hide for any politicians. I mean, that itself is a big growth factor in pushing everyone. So the more we can do, and then that has to come from government side, a lot of these things. Of course, private sector does their own thing. I mean, in Jamshedpur, Tata groups have done so many things, and I have been beneficiary of that. Why cannot that be replicated in a different way where you have other private sector doing it? So I just see that part is coming through. I feel very enthused, and it is investment led, investment driven growth, what I see, and not necessarily consumer. And just final point, if you talk about consumers have saved money over the last 2 years, where they have not been able to spend, not the kind of saving you would like, that you can't spend or you have been unwell. But I think, if you look at consumer, if you talk to anybody from pre-COVID days to now, to days now, the focus on healthcare is immense. I think that the multiplier effect of that, people to stay healthy, I think that there's a lot of things which will drive us forward and drive us better. And for India, which is late in the growth cycle, given that a lot of other economies have developed, we have the advantage of picking the best practices, best technology. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to use our smart people who have gone everywhere, bring them into different roles in government, private sector, and just do that. I mean, that's exactly what we need, like a national debate going from the heads of businesses to heads of political parties. Say, we need to grow this country. We can do it. We have the talent, everything. All we need is government to play the supporting role and let the people who can do it deliver.
Manish, do you believe that this budget has
Mm-hmm.
actually, worked or actually given a direction to the fact that will this basically meet the requirement of young India, right? Or the next generation who's just looking forward from this government in terms of the reform to provide a
Mm-hmm.
right employment opportunity, right infrastructure, right policies to make sure that there are enough jobs available, the quality of job is there, and also
Mm-hmm.
the fact that are we taking steps towards making India or all those. So do you believe this budget had those part of it? Or obviously it's a long journey, nothing happens overnight. It may take maybe 10, 12 budgets to really make it. But do you believe this budget had any of those things which can really believe can be a path breaking in terms of some of those reforms, or it's a steady state path which the government has taken?
So I would say that, job creation, of course, government have to do job creation as much as they can, but it's the private sector, which is also has to be the driver. You do not want job creation which are just government jobs. I mean, that doesn't really add to productivity, and I think that those are not the kind of jobs we want. We want a smaller government that plays an effective role when it comes to rules, regulations, anti-competition, and all these things. So you allow. I mean, I always believe that the way we define free market does not mean that you do whatever you want to do. Free market means is that the government has to create an atmosphere that keeps the market free, the participants free, so they can feel free that they can grow business, establish business, and that's the job that the government should do. So has this budget in itself done to make a lot of these things happen? I think it's just a step in that direction. I think the narrative is very important. When I don't see government relying on subsidies or not putting that as front and center, I feel good about it, that the government feels confident that we can talk about investment-led budget, investment growth. Think about it, if we have a very good tax collection again, which I have no doubt it will be, and that's the sign of how the economy is maturing, then you feel even more bolder that you're going to use that money to spend and make things happen. So it's in that direction. I don't see anything negative, which takes away from it. Will it deliver all the jobs that the Indian youth need? Not this budget alone. This budget just is a helping hand in that direction. And for that, a lot of the people, the private sector has to pick up a lot of these things and deliver, and the government has to prepare the framework. So in that aspect, I think that this is a good budget. But as I said, you cannot have everything. I have been part of several discussions here with ministers. I'm part of policy group discussions. And sometimes we forget that, our politicians have not had the advantage that you and I have had. I have been member of Tory party, talking to shadow ministers, sitting on discussions, reading from the research, everything that has been done through. We think differently in how we can do, but the amount of the talent or the perseverance it takes for somebody to be the leader of BJP party and become prime minister does not leave that person enough time to educate themselves in policy and governance and everything. And that's where the help from everyone around them comes. I think the job of a leader is to have the most smartest people around them. That's exactly what I see in the UK and everywhere. I got drafted into Tory party and things. I was just here second or third year of my being in the UK because they found my views helpful. But that's what I say, that you have to take the best that you have. Now we're talking about UK, where there's no lack of talent, and you still seek for these things and bring them into government or into discussions. I was sitting down in shadow treasury team and working on Bloomberg terminal of Shadow Chancellor Osborne, who became the finance minister next. I was the first one to use his Bloomberg terminal. So I think what I'm trying to say, that government has a lot of to do, not just budget alone. The way we work, the way the government works has to change, and there is nothing that one can prescribe. You just have to pick from the best practices. You have to speak widely. Do not have yes men around you who are not challenging. Bring in the best people. I think that is exactly what the government can do, and there's no end to that. Bring in the best people, give them opportunity, keep them for a limited time, let them go. They take the government understanding into private sector. When they come from private sector, they bring the private sector understanding into government. It's a stagnation which is bad. You cannot have like 30-40 year career in just one place. I think that's just wrong. This is exactly where the knowledge transfer, the operation understanding, these things don't work, and both work in silo. They don't trust each other. They can't do things, and those things cannot be drafted in the budget. And I think these things are a much bigger thing that India has to focus on. And every politician and every political party and everyone who wants to be a political leader or has dreams of being a minister should educate themselves how these things work in US and UK. And this is what I mean by best practices, something that is working, which has been done. Why not just learn from it and copy and do it? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then we have massive amount of consumption and population and growth. I mean, India could be a stellar economy, stellar economy. We are democracy. I mean, sometimes people tell me, but you have SOEs in China, and yeah, but we are not an autocratic nation, so you can't compare SOEs delivering the same thing as they have delivered in China. If you want to be a democracy, you have to let some of these controls go, which is what we saw in second half of, if you look at this last 70 years of our independence, the second half we had better growth because you had better productivity, you had deregulation, you had all this tariff, and I mean, we did us a lot of bad damages by following the Russian model of state control. And then we came out of it and we did well. So why not just continue and do more of that?
So, Manish, some quick fire specifically to this budget. In your opinion, 5 sectors which will be the one who's got impacted positively and 5 negatively?
So I would say that, the consumer staples, you have to be a bit careful on that, because as you rightly pointed out, the consumer has to drive that and there has to be more consumption. But anything we're talking about, real estate, infrastructure, banks, autos, where we're talking about where the credit has to be extended and they are going to drive the growth in many ways. Mobility, the more mobility that you have, the better. And I sometimes I just have this picture in my mind, when I used to go from Ranchi to Jamshedpur and in a car with my dad, and I would see people just sitting around and doing nothing. And I was thinking about, but how can you have a GDP where half your people just sit around and do nothing? So just to get them moving itself is going to create GDP. You can create a little football tournament and sell food, and you will have a contribution to GDP. Not doing anything and sitting on your back and not moving is just not on. I mean, you should go where the jobs are, and so mobility. And this is where when you see infrastructure spending, logistics, the transport system, the subway system, which is what you need, because I think that we have a lot of highway thing we have done well. We need a lot of thing happening within the city. When you see all that mobility increases, absolutely those sectors, and this is where infra, auto, travel, these things are going to play a very important role.
And anything negative which you take out from this budget, which can really impact any sector negatively?
So I would say the negative for me would be driven by the global factors. Like if something happens in US, and remember, we still import a lot of our energy, so we are very vulnerable in that front. We are running a 6.5% budget deficit. We have borrowing. All that is good if you are delivering growth in a way where it is in line with what's happening globally. Tomorrow, if the inflation runs at 10% in US and Fed raises rate back to 4%, I mean, you will have a problem. There will be a problem. I think that a lot of our domestic saving and domestic investments is now driving India, which is a good thing, but India is still in a transition. And that's when you can face pressure. So if that was to happen, there would be a problem. But purely from investment point of view, I mean, if you look at last rate cycle, which Fed had, you will see that the Sensex and Nifty, it still grew almost 15%, 14% per annum. Though you had at least 3 or 4, if I recall correctly, over 10% correction. And those things are going to happen. But the direction of travel is fixed. The direction of travel is high, is aiming higher and in the right corner. And you will have your vol, which is a factor, but the global factor, in my opinion, is negative. A strong dollar is negative, and that's something to watch out.
And if you need to vote this particular budget on scale of 1 to 10, Manish, 10 be the best, how do you rate this?
I would give it an 8. And as I said, I mean, for me, divestment, I just can't understand that there's so much of capital which is lying around, tied up to state businesses at both state and federal level, and which is not being used. And you would try to raise capital by bond money and everything when there's plenty to be done. I think there should be a huge amount of divestment. Of course, at the right valuation, you don't want to sell into a falling market or not. But if you plan it properly, I mean, divestment ministry should be even bigger, in my opinion, in driving these things forward, because that's the best way to basically use local capital to make investments.
Yeah, I think this budget was quite conservative in terms of when it comes to estimation of GDP growth, tax buoyancy. I think, yeah, because of the excise cut factor, obviously the direct has been taken low. These investment targets are very, very small, as you rightly mentioned. Definitely, I think there are a lot of conservative. I think they are basically trying to rectify that. Last year they took a very aggressive dive. Still
Okay.
numbers
Yeah,
are
yeah.
not got delivered, so that might actually be the reason. But
Yeah,
great, thanks Manish, thanks for joining, and thanks a lot for sharing your view. And
Thank
looking
you very
forward
much.
to see you again.
Thank you, Bharat.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all related documents carefully before investing.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to never miss an update from ICICI Direct.